Above the gorge. The two mountains were so narrow and close together, they were referred to by the space between them, the gorge. They were beautiful spikes with cypress trees clinging to their tops and steep sides. The great poet of the age, Wuyang, saw the spiky mountains in a painting. She came to the gorge and saw them in reality. They took her breath away. She desired to live in the peaks that dressed and undressed in the clouds. She chose one of the mountaintops and built a series of wooden ladders, stairs, and toeholds to reach it. Then she built a hut at the summit among the cypress trees. One day, Wuyang was sitting at her table, brush in hand, working on a poem. She was vaguely distracted by unusual sounds that seemed to be echoing their way up from below. It was cloudy outside. All she could see was whiteness. For several days, the clouds remained while the sounds grew louder. They seemed to be coming nearer. What is it? She wondered. Wuyang looked out her window one morning and the clouds were gone. There was a hut on the other peak. This is what had happened. The other great poet of the age, Pan Qinzhao, heard what Wuyang had done and came to see the gorge for herself. When she saw the mountains, she was filled with a desire to live on the uninhabited peak. She constructed ladders, stairs, and toeholds and built a hut of her own. That first morning, Wuyang looked across to the other peak several times. She saw through the window of the opposite hut a woman seated at a table holding brush and paper. Wuyang had wanted solitude, but she felt pleased to have a quiet neighbor nearby. Time passed for the poets in the sky, alone and yet near each other. One evening, Wuyang stood and began shouting a poem to her neighbor. Pan Qinzhao looked up in surprise. But after so many days in silence, the sound of a voice was welcome. And this was not just any voice, it was the great Wuyang, reciting a new poem. When the poet finished, Pan Qinzhao responded by calling out a new poem of her own. Wuyang was amazed. For the first time, she recognized who was living beside her. From that day on, the poets would yell their poetry across the gorge. Sometimes there was nothing for them to see but the white world of clouds. Sometimes the clouds would part and they would glimpse each other. Sometimes, oil lamps in hand, they shouted toward a tiny light in the darkness. Poetry rained down on the farmers in the gorge. On overcast days, the words seemed to fall from the shrouded sky itself. Wuyang, the brilliant language scholar at the university, learned of all this. A question formed in her mind. How did listening to the great poets affect the farmers who lived at the base of the mountains? Her theory was that the farmers were irritated by the noise and felt resentful and inferior as a result of being subjected to things beyond their understanding. She came to the gorge, built a hut, and began her research. What is it like for you, having to listen to the poets all the time? Wuyang asked a farmer. Poetry is part of our lives. I have learned several of the poems, which I often say out loud as I plow behind my ox. Does it bother you having to listen whenever the poets decide to shout? Not at all. I feel blessed. Do the others in the gorge feel this way? Oh, yes. Wuyang interviewed everyone. Then she went to the fields and listened to the farmers working alone and together. She overheard them quoting entire poems. She observed that the farmers used phrases from their poems in their everyday speech. Sometimes the original meaning of a phrase would be preserved. Sometimes the meaning would be changed to refer to a farming task. She found no instances of irritation, resentment, or inferiority. Wuyang completed her research and started to pack up her belongings. It was time to return to the university. She intended to write a paper on what she had learned, but she felt odd and heavy. She could barely move. me, she wondered. She rested a few days. Then she thought, I might as well write the paper while I'm here, regaining my strength. She began immediately. But when her paper was finished and she was again packing to go, the strange malady returned. Days passed and the illness lingered on. She lay in her hut, listening to the sounds outside. Finally, she understood. She did not want to leave. She had grown to love the gorge, the language of the farmers, and the blessings of the poetry. She stayed on. After many years, Li Dian died. The farmers held a funeral for her and recited her poems. Pan King Zhao died soon after. It was thought she died of a broken heart, missing her friend in the clouds. The farmers held a funeral and recited Pan King Zhao's poetry too. Wuyang recorded these events. Even after the poets were gone, she remained in the gorge. Though poetry descended no more, the farmers continued to repeat what they had learned and to use phrases from the poems. It was a comfort and a pleasure. To this day, remnants of the old ladders, stairs, and toeholds can be found above the gorge. In later paintings of the two mountains, the huts can sometimes be discerned.